Has Warren Buffett lost his touch?
Yeah, Brian, I am always excited when we get to talk about the Oracle from Omaha, Mr. Warren Buffett himself, because we love his stuff, but it seems like now the tone out there is a little bit different, right? People are trying to say, oh, maybe it's not the same Warren of old.
Well, I think it's interesting. We've had on the show hopper, we're going to be covering the annual shareholder letter from Berkshire Hathaway. And what do you know? Warren, knowing we needed to, put a little juice into this being a hot topic or a current event, he goes out and makes one of the biggest purchases since 2016 at Berkshire Hathaway. So good for him and Charlie. But it is something I think we ought to have a discussion on. Sure. Is because between cryptos, between Robinhood, all these modern things that are impacting the investment life, is Warren, because he is 91 years of age, has he lost his touch on everything? Is he disconnected from this new modern world that we live in?
If you've been paying attention to financial media, there are a lot of headlines out there that are suggesting that. Like here's one from the Financial Times. Light on tech, heavy on banks. Has Warren Buffett lost his touch? Specifically asking that question. From The Economist, Warren Buffett should step aside for his chosen successor. Or even, this is from the Chicago Tribune. Has Warren Buffett lost his touch? Berkshire's trailing the S&P 500 and Kraft Heinz is a major part of the problem. So the financial media outlets are saying, hey, Warren's not doing what Warren has always done. Maybe his time has passed. Maybe he should move on. Or like you said, maybe he's not even up with the times anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to see this in numbers format. We'll get to that. But here's the thing that I think that, because I've already kind of given a prelude to this, is that crypto. What does Warren think about crypto? And actually, you don't even have to. He's actually been very open about this, and it reminds me, and it's even quoted here too. Warren looks at crypto just like he looks at gold. And if you've ever read all of his letter to shareholders, he talks about that, I still remember, this is from a number of years ago. He talks about you could take one of the biggest stadium, just take a large major league stadium, like a baseball stadium, and you could put all the world's gold on the inside of it. And you could walk away from it for 20 years, come back, and it would just basically sit there. Nothing would change. Right. It would still be this big block of gold sitting in the middle of the stadium. Well, he kind of has the exact same feeling on Bitcoin to the point that he says, here's the quote, "You're just hoping the next guy pays more, and you only feel you'll find the next guy to pay more if he thinks he's going to find someone that's going to pay him more."
So you got to be the top, and then the people, and the more people, all the way down.
It does start to form a geometric shape at some point. But it's Warren Buffett says Robinhood is catering to the gambling instincts of investors. Now, I think a lot of people like Robinhood, because it's supposedly what's on the postcard or the brochure is that it's making investing more approachable, more fun, gamifying it to a way that more and more people are discovering this awesome tool. But Warren's key point, he's turning it into a casino.
That's right.
Something that is a true wealth creation machine that's taking advantage of the growth of the economy, the evolution and the accelerating returns of humankind. Somehow through technology, we've turned it into a just fancy casino.
Now, what I think is interesting is a lot of people out there listening may not be familiar with Warren or as familiar with kind of his track record or what he's done. What you might be hearing are these headlines presently, this stuff about how he views Bitcoin or how he thinks about Robinhood or some of the investments that maybe aren't doing the same that his investments have done historically. But I think it's really important. We want to recap and look at what has he actually done historically from an investment standpoint. And he, in his annual letter to shareholders every year, he puts a detail of his performance in Berkshire Hathaway since 1965 all the way through present day versus the S&P 500, and I think he does it with dividends reinvested, right?
Yeah, I think, by the way, if you want to know if you're in the right place, when you type in Berkshire Hathaway, if the website looks like it's from the invention of the internet
from
the mid-90s, then you'll know you're in the right place because they have spent zero money in web development. I think that's on purpose. But you can see it is pretty, if you look at this off the cuff, you just take the number at the bottom of the columns because he's got per share of market value of Berkshire, and then he's got the S&P 500 with dividends being reinvested. Berkshire Hathaway has annual gains of 20.1%. The S&P 500 is 10.5%. By the way, pause right there. 10.5% sounds spectacular.
Pretty awesome. Pretty stellar for a 60
you hear
plus year period.
20.1 and you're like, holy cow. But I think this needs more context because by Warren's own admission, investing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s sure felt a lot easier to create alpha or better positive returns for a manager than the indexes than it has felt for the last few decades.
Yeah,
so what does the data show?
Well, technology has made the world such a smaller place. It's much easier for everyone to have immediate information right at their fingertips for anything that they want. So it probably is a lot more difficult now than it was then. But if you actually look at his by decade performance, if you just look at Berkshire's performance each decade versus the S&P 500, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, in the 60s, S&P 500 annualized about 4.9%. Warren was at almost 30%, so a large outperformance. Again, large outperformance in the 70s, in the 80s. In the 90s, great time for all markets. S&P 500 annualized about 18%. Warren was at 20.5%. This is the one that I think is the most interesting, though. And this is how you can tell that he truly is a contrarian investor. Because, Brian, we were working together at this time. In the 2000s, you always hear about the lost decade. It was a decade where if you invested over that 10-year period, you didn't make any money. And they get that from the S&P 500 actually being down about 1% per year on an annualized basis through the 2000s. Warren actually made 6% over that exact same decade, which is pretty remarkable. But here we are in the 2010s and 2020s. He's still doing really, really good. S&P 500 made about 13.6%. He was just over 13% in the 2010s. And then so far in the 2020s, which were only a couple of years into
Not a lot of data there yet.
He's still annualizing like over 15%, markets at 23.5%. So I would still say Warren's doing pretty good. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would definitely not put, 91 years of age is pretty incredible. And we can see him and Charlie are still doing deals. And if you read the letter to shareholders, you also see they're very complimentary. They have a whole team behind them. I think Warren, he's really been kind of setting the stage for the last, definitely the last 3 to 5 years.
Sure.
That he knows at some point he's not going to be able to do this, and he doesn't want investors to be spooked that just because him and Charlie are older, that Berkshire Hathaway is gone after they no longer are at the helms anymore.
What I think is really interesting is that, and if you've never read their letter, you should go do it because it's so much fun to read. It reads. I guess it's textbooky, but it doesn't read textbooky, right? Like it's super, super interesting. I wonder how many folks could describe their personal annual net worth statement in the same way that Warren describes Berkshire's books or as he walks their businesses. Because I'm just fascinated how well he knows all the different segments and the stories he can tell you related to each. It is mind-blowing. And how much it makes sense. Because, Brian, you and I before, we've looked at like financial documents, corporate filings, those sorts of things. And it's hard. It's like reading a foreign language. It is not difficult reading Warren's annual letter because he writes in such a way that anyone can read it. No matter where you are from an intellectual capacity standpoint, it's just easy to read. I think they're amazing. I think they're wonderful.
There's tons, and by the way, I love that it's very consistent. If you read Berkshire Hathaway's letter to shareholders, he will change. Like everybody knows the quote where he says, you need to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And how many different ways can he say thimbles, buckets, when he's talking about when it's raining opportunity, getting out there, he says the same stuff over and over. And that's when and this is what we even get this criticism. People say, your show gets so consistent. I know everything you're going to say
before you
say it. I'm like, this is probably an indicator that, first of all, we actually practice what we preach and we truly believe it. We're very passionate about it. And then I would say anybody who feels that way, if you're just learning and never creating action, let's actually start making stuff happen because you do reach a graduation point but I think it shows a lot of value when you see stability of people not flopping around on what they believe and having some core principles. I also think, Warren is one of those people, like when they bought the railroad, it was very contrarian.
People thought that was crazy. That's an old technology. That's an old school thing.
In the world, with this rich company, don't we know? I mean, railroads we're putting them out the
100 years
pasture.
ago, yeah.
But no, it's turned out to be a brilliant investment because, look, we have to still move goods. Matter of fact, it's probably getting even more important as we get to point of sale where Amazons and all the other things, they are getting to where distribution and logistics, railroads are going to continue to be a big part of that for decades. So he just seems like he can see around corners in a really smart way. And he even talks about that. They own a lot of infrastructure, stuff that no matter what's going on in the world, there's going to be a need for it, a lot of their investments.
Well, I love how he kind of describes, I'm just going to read this quote directly. He says, many people perceive Berkshire as large and somewhat strange collection of financial assets, but we actually own more U.S.-based infrastructure assets, we call them plant, property, and equipment, that are owned and operated by any other American corporation. And I just love the way that supremacy has never been our goal. It has, however, become a fact. He just said, hey, we're so good at what we do. We recognize opportunity so well. We can't help it that we happen to be the biggest in the U.S. of owning these types of assets. And by the way, these types of assets have performed very, very well for us.
I thought it was interesting. I've even picked on Warren in the past because I feel like he's a little hypocritical in his tax policy statement is because he talks about that wealthy people should pay a lot more in taxes and the fact that people in his secretary pays a higher tax rate than he does. And we've always tried to explain, hey, look, he's using capital investments versus ordinary income, and there's different capital, tax structures there. But here he kind of, I give him credit. He actually approached taxes and had a quote in here that he looks at the government as his partner. As
a silent partner that gets a large portion of their earnings and their growth, which is kind of an interesting way to think about taxation.
He goes, in fairness to our government partner, our shareholders should acknowledge, indeed and trumpet, the fact that Berkshire's prosperity has been fostered mightily because the company has operated in America. Our country would have done splendidly in the years since 1965 without Berkshire's, meaning our country would have done great. Absent our American home, however, Berkshire would never have come close to becoming what it is today. When you see the flag, say thanks.
I love it. I think that's great. Now, so it's really easy for us to all say, like, I just saw a quote come in. Of course, he's out of touch. He's a billionaire, right? It's easy to think about Warren being out of touch or having so much money or Berkshire being such a big enterprise. Think, well, how is any of that really applicable to me? How is that applicable to my personal finances? What I think is great is that when you read through these letters to shareholders, if you can kind of take the 30,000 foot view and step back, you'll recognize there are a lot of really solid financial planning concepts that all of us can apply. And I think that's what's great in this year's letter. Those nuggets were still in there. And I think we're going to sort of categorically go through each one of them.
So the first one, this is really step 1 and step 4 of our financial order of operations. Remember, you can always go to moneyguy.com/resources and download our free deliverable on the 9 steps of the financial order of operations, or you can go to learn.moneyguy.com for our deeper dive course, as he talks about the power of cash, cash reserves. And by the way, Warren Buffett is the king of getting rich off of cash. And what do I mean by that? Because we all know cash is trash. It's not paying anything. But if you are the only person in the room that has cash when everybody else is struggling, think about, and I've made this analogy and it sticks and it works. Cash is very much like the oxygen we breathe. We all take it for granted until you go underwater, and it all of a sudden becomes the most important thing because you need oxygen to live. You need cash to keep operations. And there's a reason we run cash flow reports as accountants and so forth, and free cash flow. You've got to understand cash is so important. So what Charlie and Warren have done is they make sure when everybody else is struggling to find this precious resource that, yes, is trash when we're all living in abundance, he can swoop in and be the contrarian that buys things that are at a peach of a deal.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things, why Berkshire did not have a lost decade in the 2000s. Because remember, 2000s were so unique. We had the dot-com bubble burst at the very beginning, and then we had the Great Recession at the very end. because Berkshire and Warren are in such healthy cash positions, they're able to capitalize on that. If you can manage your own personal finances that way, where you do have an emergency reserve in place and you have your deductibles covered, it does allow you in those times of need, in those scary times, to continue putting your army of dollar bills to work. And I think this quote was great that Warren had. He said, "Charlie and I have pledged that Berkshire will always hold more than $30 billion of cash equivalents. We want your company," because this is for the shareholders, "to be financially impregnable and never dependent on the kindness of strangers or even that of friends. Both of us like to sleep soundly, and we want our creditors, insurance claimants, and you to do so as well." That is exactly what cash does for you. It gives you peace of mind no matter what else is going on in the world.
And just put an exclamation point on that key phrase there, is never dependent on the kindness of strangers or even that of friends. Guys, I know you're so disappointed with what cash is paying you right now. The Fed's starting to raise interest rates, so hopefully that will improve at some point in the future. But it is one of those things, make sure you're respecting deductibles covered, which is step number 1 of the financial order of operations. And number 4 is emergency reserves. You've got to make sure you've got that 3 to 6 months.
So another thing I think that Warren talks about, or that we talk about a lot on the show, that Warren kind of echoed in his letter, is how to become an expert at something, right? We always talk about trying to become lifetime learners, continue to expand your knowledge, continue to grow the base of information that you have. Well, one of the interesting things I think that Warren talked about in this letter was, how do you actually become an expert? We always talk about, this 10,000 hour concept. You have to do something for a long period of time to get enough reps to be able to become an expert at that thing. Well, Warren and Charlie had sort of a different view, and they said, hey, one of the best ways to become an expert at something is to teach it, is to learn how to teach it well.
But read the quote, because I think this is, because it's such an oddball thing that is thrown in here from Charlie Munger that I'd love for you to kind of read the quote and then let's talk about this.
So this is what they said. They said, "Teaching, like writing, has helped me develop and clarify my own thoughts. Charlie calls this phenomenon the orangutan effect. If you sit down with an orangutan and carefully explain to it one of your cherished ideas, you may leave behind a puzzle primate, but you will yourself exit thinking much more clearly."
What I like about this is that this is exactly, for internalizing this, doing a podcast since 2006, being a content creator and writing, teaching. I mean, guys, if you could see my SAT scores on the verbal side of things, you'd be like, this guy can't string together a sentence.
And yet he made a career in talking now.
But this is the thing. I am such a better writer than I was in high school, college, because I have written so much content for decades now that the reputation has made me where I think I actually could go teach some of these things. You've made me better at this.
Absolutely.
And I think it is one of those things. There's a reason, like as a CPA, as a CFP, when we're doing continuing education, if you actually taught at a conference, it's something that gave CPE credits or stuff, you get twice as much being the teacher of that. So there's a lot to learn from that. So mastery, repetition, make sure you're putting the reps in. That's the other thing. You mentioned the 10,000 hours. It's made famous by Malcolm Gladwell and the Outliers. Don't skip that step of getting the practice in to create that expertise so you really are the top tier that people value your time, your ideas, and everything you're doing. Don't skip that step.
I think another thing that was really interesting as Warren was kind of going through his letter, another little piece that we got back, and this one I love because this had echoes of Millionaire Next Door all through it. He was talking about career and how you select, what you do for a living and how you go about choosing a vocation. And this is what Warren said. He says, "I have urged that university students seek employment in 1, the field, and 2, with the kind of people they would select if they had no need for money. Economic realities may interfere with that kind of search. Even so, I urge the students never to give up the quest, for when they find that sort of job, they will no longer be working." He says there are 2 really important things when it comes to the career that you choose. What's the field that it's in, what kind of work it is, and who are the people you're going to be around? And pick the things that you would do if money weren't a factor or weren't an obstacle in your way.
I find it interesting. If you go ask a good high school student what their career goals are, when I used to speak in high schools, I was always amazed. People would say, I'm going to be rich. So they throw out, first you got to get past, I'm going to be a performing artist or a professional athlete. And then you start getting down to doctors, attorneys, and you say, why do you want to be an attorney? Why do you want to be a doctor? They make lots of money.
They're the rich folks.
And I'm always like, the why is somewhat empty, because I think people have this desire to be rich without understanding the why. And actually, guys, Joe Rogan had Mr. Beast on recently. And I was like, this is brilliant. And the fact that Mr. Beast is 23 years of age, and he's got the 10,000 hours in, because he's been
doing it for
creating
a while now.
content for, I think he said 11, 12 years at this point. It's just amazing what he's creating. And Joe Rogan asked him, he said, have you ever balled out? Because I think most people, and we've helped so many of our wealthy clients write estate documents or work on creating estate documents so their kids, if in case they inherited a large sum of money when they're in their early 20s, even early 30s, they don't go crazy and start buying the Ferraris, going out to Vegas, gambling it all away. So he asked that question, and Mr. Beast said, yeah, I balled out for a little bit. I bought a really nice car. I was buying shirts that cost $1,000 a piece. But at the end of the day, I realized it just wasn't doing it for me. I enjoyed creating the content, the actual doing of the process, the why was so much more fulfilling. And it made me think of Brewster's Millions. I wish everyone, now look, I know, and Warren had the disclaimer there that economic realities. And I think economic realities is when we talk about the levels of wealth. If you go check out our levels of wealth shows of the past, we talk about you have to get past like level 2 where you can pay your rent, you can feed yourself. That stuff is basic survival. But beyond that, I think you're going to find the why is so much more important, because if you're making lots of money but it's empty, you're not going to have the same feeling. Right. And here's a perfect example. We just both got back from vacation. We shared our pictures with you guys. I've already made a lot of jokes this morning that everybody thinks Bo's really good looking. He has great arms. Fortunately, you guys like my legs, so it makes the concept
put us
seem
together.
a little better.
We got a
but it is one of those things where my wife, because she doesn't listen to the show, so it's okay. When we come back from a big vacation, she gets kind of sad. She really does.
The post-vacation blues,
and
right?
then I got both my daughters. It's like, we have to go to school. We don't want to go back to school. And my wife, she actually said this to me. She verbalized, she goes, kind of mad at you. And I said, why? And she goes, you're actually looking forward to going to work tomorrow, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I am. I enjoy coming to work every day. And I think that is what Warren is trying to really put forward. Look, wealth, and what I have found, is a side effect of doing what you're really passionate about, hanging out with the people who have the same interests as you. I know that it sounds a little bit like a unicorn you're chasing, but I think Warren really put it in great words there. And that's what Mr. Beast was talking about when he was talking to Joe Rogan. Aspire and really make sure you got that why figured out, not the what or how much you think you need to be rich, because that's an empty goal.
And I think it's really interesting coming from the guy who's 91 years old, and he could have retired 100 times over, and he could have probably retired 40 or 50, 60 years ago, and yet here he is still doing it. And it's not about the money, it's more about he enjoys the people he's around. I've never been to, have you been to his office in Omaha? I've never been there, but he says he's got the greatest office staff in the world. He hangs out with his buddy Charlie, and he loves what he's doing, right? So I think there's something really, really cool that we can all learn from that. All right, and then here's the last little nugget that he gave, and this is on investing for the average person, right? Investing for the everyday person. He said, people who are comfortable with their investments will, on average, achieve better results than those who are motivated by ever-changing headlines, chatter, and promises. And I feel like in today's society and culture, all there are ever-changing headlines, ever-changing chatter, ever-changing promises, ever-changing new hot things, ever-changing things to be scared about. And Warren says, slow down, and have comfort in the plan that you have in place. And on average, over the long term, you're going to do better than the folks who are fickle and kind of go whichever way the wind blows them when it comes to investing.
I said earlier, there's always a consistency with Warren. You start seeing trends, and we've been doing this long enough and studying his material. as soon as I read this, I was like, okay, here he is. He's hitting that key root, principle that he has, which is our quote, our favorite holding period is forever.
That's great.
So when you, and Bo, you say this so good. When I hear you on the phone with scared clients, you say, look, I want to create a financial plan, an investment plan that is good before, during, and even after.
That's exactly right.
That reflects your age, your goals, what you're trying to do, the why of all of your financial life. That's what Warren's talking about here, so that your holding period is forever, so that no matter what's going on in this crazy world we live in, you're set up for success. And that's why I love reading this. I know it is a quirky, nerdy hobby. And these shows, they haven't done great. When we do Warren Buffett content, it's not like this is going to be by an age series or the net worth shows.
But you know what? It makes us happy.
But it does.
Like
it makes me happy, and I love this annual tradition, and we're going to keep doing it because by God, if it makes us happy, we're going to algorithm catch on and start studying Warren Buffett stuff more because there's just a lot of good content there.
I think it's awesome. So I would say, unequivocally, no, I don't think that Papa Warren has lost his touch yet. I don't think that anything has gone awry there, and I will anxiously wait the next annual letter to shareholder when he writes it at 92. I hope, because I just think it's fantastic stuff. You know what else I love, Brian? You know what else I think?
You just put a little context on something that Warren. Oh, no, let's just keep going. Keep going.
What I do?
Just hearing 92 and
got it.
year. I mean, there's a law of probability there. It makes me sad.
No, he's rocking.
He's doing great.
He's doing great. All right, here's another thing that we love getting to do for you guys. We love getting to answer your questions. It's one of the reasons we show up live here on Tuesday mornings to hang out with y'all. So if you have a question, get it in the hopper right now. We have the team out on the wings. They're going to get them in front of us. And if you are thinking about a question you want answered, if you haven't gone to the website and checked out some of our old shows, we have tons of old content out there. You can go to our resource page, moneyguide.com/resources. If you want to do a deeper dive with us, you can go check out learn.moneyguide.com. And if you don't follow us on our socials, there's all kinds of awesome stuff out there. We are now on Twitter. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. And we are on TikTok. Are we on any others, Katie? Is there anything I'm missing there? We got them all.
What a dangerous proposition to start naming
all.
I
know. I started going blank there in the middle of it. So get your questions in the chat, and we're going to start loading up. Okay, here's the first one, Brian. This one is from Financial Princess. So we're talking royalty here. If my husband and I are already saving 25% toward retirement, but have not maxed out our 401ks, are we okay to start contributing to an after-tax brokerage account and our son's 529 account, right? So this is what they're saying. Hey, we're already doing the 25%, but it hasn't gotten us to the point to where we're maxing out both of the retirement plans yet, so we haven't moved on to an after-tax account, but we are hitting the 25% number. How do you counsel someone to think through that? And is that an okay time to start building up college assets, or should they focus on that third bucket? Like, what would the FOO tell them to do as they're kind of thinking through that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I will tell you, this answer is going to be very specialized to Financial Princess to a degree, because this is a unique situation, because it is very common. If you go to moneyguide.com/resources, download the 9 steps of the financial order of operations, learn.moneyguide.com if you want the deeper dive course. And we do cover this in the course.
We do.
Is that step 6 is max out retirement. So you're like, wow, why do they, because as Financial Princess is bringing up, man, if I'm saving 25%, but because I'm in a lower income situation, I've reached 25%, but I didn't hit is it 20,500?
Yeah, this year it's 20,500.
So if I haven't reached 20,500 in my 401k, it seems crazy that I'm at hyperaccumulation of over 25%, but I'm still not saving for the kids. But is it okay to move past the retirement? For most people, because most people, I think, will come to have incomes, especially if you're buying the Financial Order of Operations course and you're a financial mutant, you probably do make, and I think we've done the calculation on this, and it was around $80,000 or something like that.
I think that's right.
I don't want you to walk past retirement without definitely measuring twice to make sure it makes sense to move on. But for Financial Princess, it sounds like her and her spouse are doing a lot with a little. I mean, to get 25% on an income that is low enough that you can get to 25% and still not reach the $20,500 in your 401k, kudos for being true financial mutants and being part of that stat, because there's a large percentage of millionaires that never make $100,000 a year. I think it's around a third of millionaires never make over $100,000 a year, if my data's serving me correctly. So, Financial Princess, you are spot on. If you're in a situation where 25% of your income takes you, because that's what step 6 is, max out retirement, with the understanding that we're really trying to get you to 25% for the hyperaccumulation. And if you're doing that, you can move on to step 8. And here's why, because a lot of people say, well, how can you have an exception to the rule? And here's why. If you're in an income situation where you're making less than $80,000 a year, saving 25%, realize you're kind of grounded to a lot of the social safety net of retirement. You probably go have Social Security's go cover a large portion of it. You'll have, insurance through Medicare and things like that when you retire. You can do a lot with a little. You're showing that you're very disciplined with your lifestyle. It's crazy for you not to go ahead and start saving for the kids, for saving for the good vacations and doing those type of things, because you've already shown that you're respecting the discipline of the situation. But it is one of those things, as you make more money. This is why people ask me all the time, Brian, is it okay if I count my employer's match in that 25% figure? I'm like, yeah, as long as your household income is less than $200,000, sure, count the employer match. But the more money you make, the more responsibilities fall on your shoulder, and Financial Princess is rocking it. I mean, that's incredible. That's awesome. And that's a very specialized answer, because for the vast majority of people, especially if you're making 6 figures as a household, you're probably going to reach the point where you can max out your retirement before you move on to hyperaccumulation. But for Financial Princess, she found that sweet spot. And
I do think if you are someone, because I don't think it said your age in here, as you do get closer to, within, like, you can kind of see the retirement or financial independence time horizon coming up, that's not a bad time to get a second opinion, right? So you might want to think about, how much do I need to have in my tax buckets? How much should I be saving to those, so that when I retire, if I am someone who's retiring at 50 or 52 or 57 or 62, there are different ways to think about that. That's not a horrible time to think about taking the relationship to the next level, depending on your unique and specific circumstance.
You just said something, because somebody who is this disciplined, you probably are purpose-driven, and to the fact that some of these people sound like fire individuals who are jumping out of the workforce at 50, 55, anytime before 65 years of age. If you're jumping out early like that, it is going to be very important that you have that bridge account to cover, because if you're before 59 and a half, it gets harder to get access to some of those retirement accounts. So having that after-tax brokerage account, like Financial Princess talked about, super powerful. So once again, kudos for being so disciplined and being successful.
All right, Brian, here's an interesting one. This one is from Paul. And Paul said, how do I convince my parents to invest when they have paid off everything and are just piling up cash? Haha. I think this is really interesting, because you come from a family that they were financial mutants in the sense that they did all of the hard things right. They didn't run up debt. They were responsible. They lived on less than they make. But this investing thing seems sort of nebulous to them, right? How would you tell someone, this is obviously a child trying to talk to their parents who've done all the right things right. They have no debt, but hey, maybe you should start investing. How do you get someone over that threshold? How do you convince someone that investing is a prudent thing to spend time doing? And my parents are the same way, so I'm happy to share some there as well.
Well, it's interesting because I do grow up in a household where my parents were so good at saving money, but never let the money work for them. That army of dollar bills concept that we cover so much. And by the way, I had this conversation with my daughter last week. She works at Chick-fil-A, and she's just racking up cash because my daughter just is so Spartan. I mean, her stuff, she doesn't care about clothes. She doesn't care about she just wants to work on the computer, do animation and other things. And I was like, look, you're just letting your cash pile up. You haven't made a contribution to your Roth, in a while. And that's concerning to me because, and I got it, because we had this conversation. She was like, it just feels so good to have cash in the bank.
Sitting there.
And I realized that I am asking you to create I don't know if it's the three, the three bears or the Goldilocks. I guess it is Goldilocks. Three bears. They're all related. But I'm asking for you to create the Goldilocks situation where, yes, cash is so comforting. We just covered how Warren Buffett talks about he's always going to keep a base level in there. But there is this point where you can have too much of a good thing where your money does need to work for you. And I've shared the example of two parents. My in-laws were never they didn't make $1 gazillion a year, and my parents never made $1 gazillion a year. But the difference between my in-laws and my parents is my in-laws started investing. I mean, not a ton of money, but they put some of it to work in the Fidelity Magellan Fund back when the Fidelity Magellan Fund was rip-rocking, making money hand over fist. And it's a tale of two night and day. I mean, because my parents have a modest level of money, and then my in-laws had multiple six figures of assets. They got close to, 7 figures. And it's one of those things, and it's like there's no difference in what was funded. The difference is, and realize, I think this is what most people don't realize, when you retire, and this is what you could tell your parents, because even though they're probably closer to retirement, assuming they live to be 90 years of age, there's still parts of their money that is still 30 to 40 years in the future.
That's right.
70 to 95% of the account value is going to be the growth of the account value if you give it enough time for compounding growth to kick in. Don't neglect that. I mean, you have to first respect the financial reserves, give them the peace of mind money that they need, but then they do need to make sure that they're not becoming hoarders and being misers and not letting that money grow and create. And by the way, focus on, if you're trying to have this conversation with your parents, the why. Is the why peace of mind? Okay, we can capture that through the cash reserves. And then if the why is, because I have a call with a dear friend this Thursday. She's getting older. She has this false sense that she can't spend some of her money because she wants to leave money behind for the kids, create a legacy.
Sure.
And I think it's a lot of people, and we're going to have a whole conversation about that. So a lot of parents will have a legacy mindset too, that they want to leave behind some money. Investing definitely can help bolster that part of the conversation, because what's better than saving is getting that army of dollar bills where your money is exponentially getting bigger than even what you can do with your hands, your backs, and your brains.
Yeah, I can't remember if this was Chris Voss in The Art of Negotiation, but I think if you're talking to your parents about how they start doing this to get comfortable with it, I think you have to start with the fears. What's the thing that they're afraid of that has kept them from doing it? And then you can attack those things head on. You just said a first one. If they have an appropriate emergency reserve in place, the fear of needing to get to money and not being there is squashed, right? You can go ahead and do away with that. If their fear is, oh man, I don't want to time it wrong. The market's done really well. It's super, super frothy right now. This isn't a good time to start investing. Talk to them about dollar cost averaging. Talk about putting systems in place. If they're like, I don't know what stocks to buy and I don't know how to go determine which types of investments, great, go buy low cost, well diversified mutual funds or index funds, or think about hiring a financial professional. There are a lot of ways that if you can figure out what their fear is, inside of the financial world, there are very easy answers that you can let someone just kind of dip their toe in to kind of get addicted to. What you don't want to do is, if your parents have been saving all their money in cash and they've got $500,000 sitting in cash, you don't want to convince them to go invest all that money tomorrow, because you don't know what the market's going to do, right? If the market tanks, they're going to think you just gave them horrible advice. They'll never go back again. But if you can walk them through a strategy that will set them up for the highest likelihood of success, like dollar cost averaging over the long term, like making sure they get on the right side of the risk spectrum, you can stave off a lot of those fears. And what I think is beautiful, and I do this with my friends who want to open up their first Roth IRA, but they don't know how, they don't trust the investing world. I try to get them addicted to it. Hey, $50 a month. Let's just do this for a few months. And 6 months. How'd you do? Oh, well, that 50 is now worth like 55. How'd that? And then, you get them addicted to that. They'll start to begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, that this actually works. So it's really more of an education process, a negotiation process, but you can use negotiation tactics to get them over that line.
Yeah, I mean, because we talk primarily to financial mutants, but I look at my client base and I have business partners of financial mutants that hired me. And then because that went well, I got the business partners who are not financial mutants.
right.
These are people who spend every dime. They make great livings, but will spend every dime they make. And I always think, man, some of these people, I feel so good that I've made them truly wealthy, not just income affluent, but actually truly wealthy on net worth, because I challenge them to start with some type of monthly investment, and then it caught, and then as they had more income, they would save $1,000 more.
They get it.
And then all of a sudden they look at their portfolio and go, wow, we created wealth together. And I'm like, that's the way this does. You would never have done this if we didn't put out the breadcrumbs and actually create the path for you.
Love it. Love it. All right, Brian, this next question is from Alana. Alana said, I don't have any dependents. Should I get life insurance now while I'm still young, 31, and healthy, while it's super cheap? Or should I wait until a time when I may have dependents, but when it may cost more? So, Brian, first I think you should say, what's the purpose, the reason why we buy life insurance? And is it something we ought to buy as early as possible because we know that rates are going to go up theoretically? What's the right way to approach that? And what advice would you give Elena?
Yeah, I mean, now look, there's a whole industry out there that will tell you life insurance is also investing. Be careful. That's a whole nother show. I think if you ask me, and by the way, I have lots of life insurance on myself. We recommend it for people. We don't sell any of it, so that's probably why we can give you more of an objective take of the whole situation. Is that I think insurance is to replace and fulfill income that would be needed if you were here. Because what's the goal is ultimately you're hoping at some point in the future, say 60, 65, that you have enough assets that you can self-insure, because if for instance, if I passed away, but yet there's a big pot of money that I've saved and built for my family, my wife and children can just live off of that. Why buy life insurance for it? Because this isn't a great investment. There's a reason these insurance companies have buildings and other things and can pay huge commissions like they do. But I do have concerns because the why is not there, because just to go buy insurance because the rates are so low while you're young, yeah, that's a benefit. But the why is the box is not checked because you don't have anybody counting on the money. And also, I always think it's amazing when things line up perfectly like they should. I always think it's interesting that a lot of term life insurance policies, one of the most popular terms is 20 years. Mm-hmm. When do people typically need to go look is, okay, after you get married and you have a mortgage. Mm-hmm. Well, mortgages are paid off. I know they're 30 years, but there's some who are paid off between 15 and 20 years. Okay, so that's great. You can have a term policy that covers the debt. You have your first child. You go buy that term policy. When are they an adult and walking on their own, and you don't have to worry about funding so much of their life?
About 20 years in the future.
About 20 years in the future. And here's the cool thing about term life insurance. You don't have to just buy one policy. So you have life events that will occur. You go buy that 20-year term policy, and it's not uncommon. I think I have 5, 6, I might even have 7 policies on me because there's been between business things that have happened with us, between having different kids and other things that have happened. It's okay. And by the way, I'm now at the age, because I'm getting closer to 50, that I actually have a policy that's about to fall off because I bought this over 20 years ago. So now it's just not a reasonable policy to keep anymore. So did I leave any meat on that bone?
The only thing I was going to say, at 31, it's still 31 and it's still really, really inexpensive. And, my first policy I think I got when I was 25 or something like that. And then, my wife and I, we got married and had some kids. And then I got some more life insurance. I want to say that actually cost per thousand actually gone down. Even though I was older, the cost of insurance was cheaper for me just based on what had happened with life expectancies and mortality rates and that sort of thing. I really don't think at 31 you're going to have a huge issue or notice a huge cost differential that I don't know that I have to be in a huge hurry to go get it. I like what you said, Brian. When there are major life circumstances, you take on some unique debt that you'd like to have paid off, you get married, you have kids, you move places. When you have other things going on, I think that makes sense. I don't think you have to try to get in a hurry to try to get the best deal, because at young ages, and young is, truthfully, anyone below 48, I think is young, right? So I think that I think that's a good number to just kind of think about. So yeah, I think that's. I don't know that I'd be in a super big hurry.
Well, and also notice insurance companies, I believe they're still using 40.
I think 40 is
on a lot
the
of their
like
TV commercials
top of the
and
bell
stuff.
curve. Yep.
So I mean, you got plenty of time.
All right, here. This next question, Brian, is from Ben T, and this is an interesting one. He used how. I think he meant what's. So I'm going to change that. What's an acceptable amount of debt to take on? Dave Ramsey always says 0%, but that seems extreme. I've been trying to keep it below 50% of my total asset worth. Is that a safe margin? I don't know exactly how Ben asked that question, but I thought perhaps it'd be valuable if we talk about when you do take on debt, what are some things to keep in mind, right? Like, so first of all, is just as a yes or no question, is 0% debt always the answer? You can never have debt. Yes or no? Yes or no question?
It's no.
No, right? So if you are going to have debt, what kind of debts are acceptable? And then can you give us some parameters around that, like mortgage and credit cards and automobiles and student loans? Like, when does debt make sense? When does debt not make sense?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we give some really good guidelines. Let me get some basic life stuff out here, because these are the big life decisions where debt comes into play. Cars, that's the first thing. You graduate college, you need a car, trade school, whatever you're graduating from. You need to buy some reliable transportation. We don't let you buy luxury brands unless you can do same as cash. So if you're just looking at basic reliable transportation, I am okay with you financing, but you better be following 23-8, meaning that you better put down 20%. You don't finance it for longer than 3 years, and then the debt service can't be greater than 8% of your gross income as a household. So that's the first thing. Remember, earmark 8%. That's the first thing. Now let's talk about housing. We don't like housing, and look, this is hard. And this is why it's going to come into play, because we're in a strange market right now where even rents are going up. So in the past, I've always talked about, I don't want you to have your housing costs take more than 25% of your income. I know that that's harder now with current conditions going on, that number might naturally get pushed up to 30 or even beyond. So you better make sure you're making that up. So then that defaults to this overall rule of how much debt is okay. And I don't want you to be so debt full that you can't save money, you can't live life, because the decades will move quick. So you better be making sure you're leaving enough margin, not only for saving and investing for the future, but also just to live your life. And if all that is covered by debt, then you're in a lot of trouble. So I don't like your total debt load to really exceed about 35% of your gross income. And you're probably like, wait a minute, you left out a few things. You left out credit cards. Remember, credit cards you're paying off same as cash. They need to be disappearing. And then student loans, this is one. Guys, I'm not going, because this is not the time or place with this question, but education debt, in the past, we put mortgage debt and education debt in the positive, good column of debt. I think you have to be very careful with education debt right now, because there's a lot of blowback, because there's a lot of majors and other things that just don't pay themselves back the way they should. So I would encourage you, know if you're going to do debt, what's the incremental benefit this is going to create for your life? Like if you're going to school to become an engineer or an accountant, and okay, my first year salary will be this at graduation, then okay, your debt should not exceed that first year salary. But if you're going to college and the incremental cost is to go get into education or other things, don't go run up 6 figures of student loan debt for something that pays you $40,000 right out of college. You're creating an upside down situation. So I don't know if I covered enough. No, that was
great. Can I ask you one other bolt-on question on this?
Yeah.
What about other types of debt? Like if you want to go buy, I'm going to say a second home or a rental property or an investment like that requires debt, At what stage or where in the financial order of operations does that fall? Like, how do I know, okay, it's an okay time to use debt on that type of thing? Or should I only ever, if I'm going to go buy a rental property, only ever pay 100% cash for that? What's the
I think all those
there?
things, and we've covered this in the financial order of operations. Remember, moneyguy.com/resources. If you want to download the free 9 steps. That's really post step 7, hyperaccumulation. So when you get to steps 8 and 9, which is prepaid future expenses and then low interest debt prepayment, you can be considering investing in smart ways. I mean, thinking about, buying, it could be I don't love secondary homes, by the way, because if you go read Dr. Thomas Stanley's research on Stop Acting Rich, most wealthy people don't actually own secondary homes. But if you're thinking about terms of rental property or commercial property, I mean, you pay attention to the cash flow and then make sure, here's the thing with all debt, make sure when it gets ugly.
That's right. Oh,
I mean, when oxygen leaves the room, you got your cash reserves or your oxygen tank strapped to your back that gets you through the biggest, darkest times that can happen by using debt. Because that's the problem I find. Leverage returns are great. Everybody loves that debt allows you to go borrow money and then turn it into something. And that's when you see rental properties and other things. You're talking about leverage debt and the potential to exponentially increase your return. But there's a huge risk involved with it. So you better make sure you got the pockets to cover it. Because that's why when people talk about buying rental property, and they don't even have cash reserves or they're even maxing out their Roth IRA, I'm like, you're doing it wrong.
You're out of order.
Because, you might get lucky and you're in an appreciating market like we are now where you can do no wrong. But if the oxygen ever gets sucked out of the room, you're going to be caught skinny dipping. Everybody's going to know you're swimming naked and it's going to be ugly.
Love it. Love it. All right, Brian, this next question is from Michael. Michael says, I'm in my late 40s and have a 457 from my employer that is a school district. And there's no matching, just 457. Would it be beneficial or possible to roll this 457 to my Roth IRA? Thank you. So there's a few questions going on here. If I'm currently working there, can I roll it over to a Roth IRA? If it is a 457 and I do roll it over to a Roth IRA, there's some tax consequences I should be thinking about. And if it's a 457 and I don't work there anymore, is rolling it over always the best answer?
Oh man, there's so much going on there. That's almost a question that you talk to people about when they're financial planning, because it's a very individualized advice. First thing, if you're still working there, you might not be able to do in-service distributions. I mean, that's the first thing. A lot of times when you work for a company, they don't let you go just roll the active plan over to a Roth IRA or an IRA of any type. You have to have a qualifying event unless they allow in-service distributions. And usually, sometimes even in-service distributions, you have an age requirement strapped to it as well. So that's the first question. But let's assume that, because I think there's another step that's missing in that question. He said 457 to a Roth IRA. Well, those are, even though they're both retirement vehicles, they're different vehicles.
They're different.
One might be, and we'll just use an example of like a sports car. Let's just say a Roth IRA is a sports car because it's grown completely tax-free. It's shaped so it cuts through the wind a lot easier than that big old flatbed truck that you got over here that's just sitting up in the wind. And that's kind of like a retirement account is. Yeah, it's a great vehicle for moving lots of assets, but it's hitting that wind really hard because it's just not shaped the same way that sports car is. They are both vehicles, both retirement vehicles, but they're very different. To turn the flatbed truck, and maybe it's a car carrier that's got sports cars on it, you've got to have a conversion process. You have to pay the income tax at some point to offload those assets from that vehicle to get them over to the Roth. So that's the first thing, is that realize if you're going to convert a traditional 457 into a Roth IRA, there's a conversion process where you have to pay income taxes and pay attention to that. Now, there's a chance that this is a Roth 457. Like I said, we don't know the variables. So that would allow you to potentially roll the money into a Roth. But then now you got to think about several different things. First of all, 457s, they don't have a prepayment, meaning that if you want to get access to that money at 49 years of age, no big deal. 52, no big deal. You're going to have some rules. Now, Roth, you can get access to the principal and other things, but the earnings and stuff will have some requirements there. You need to make sure you understand all the different components. You really are, Michael. This is such a specialized question that you might be, if you've got enough assets, if you've reached that critical mass, you might consider taking the relationship to the next level and having a professional advisor help you.
Yeah, and one thing, I have a lot of friends ask me this. Their spouse or they'll leave employment and say, hey, I've got this small 403B, 407, whatever. Should I just roll it into my Roth? Because, I know I love Roth. And I'm like, and the first question I always ask is, are you maxing out your Roth? And if the answer to that question is no, I don't know that I would go trigger taxation roll in. Just start contributing to your Roth. Make sure you're getting that full $6,000 a year in there, because we love Roth assets, but we don't necessarily love them at the expense of paying unnecessary taxes if you don't have to. So I would also think through that. Have you exhausted all of your other tax-free building opportunities? That's a Roth for you, Roth for your spouse. Even if your spouse does not work, you can do a spousal Roth IRA. And are you doing health savings account, HSA? Just between those three, if you're under 50 and you have family coverage on a high deductible plan, well, 6 and 6 is 12,000, 12,000 and 7,300 is like, I'm going to say almost 20,000. I don't do public math, but it's around that, right? That's a lot of money you can get going into the tax-free side of the equation without having to do any fancy gymnastics. That's just straight up contributions. I would make sure you're exhausting those first, even before you think about converting old accounts or anything like that.
And I love that you just basically covered step number five
That's right.
of the financial order of operations, which is all your tax-free growth opportunities.
All right, Brian, this next question, this is from Matthew. Matthew said, I'm 30 and getting married this year.
Congratulations.
How would you split saving for a larger home versus investing for the future, especially when we're unsure what our family size/needs will be when the time comes? So here's what I don't know about Matthew. Is he in a home and he's saving for a bigger home, or are he and his soon-to-be spouse just saving for their first home? And when it comes to buying homes, Brian, do you go ahead and buy the house that's going to have the 2.5 kids and the dog with the white picket fence, or is there another way that you think about? How would you talk to a young person thinking about getting married, starting a family, and buying a house, and how does that correlate with how they're saving now and how they should be saving?
Yeah, so I'm going to assume for Matthew, because he's 30, getting married. The Daniel's pulled the research for us in the past. The age for the typical person buying their first home is around 33.
33, that's right.
So this is going to be one of those interesting things. They got a marriage coming up, pretty exciting stuff going on here. And this is very much a messy middle type discussion topic. And you're like, okay, I know my army of dollar bills so powerful. I've seen the 88 times over. I've seen, the money multiplier on moneyguy.com/resources, so I can find out, taking my age, figure out how much the multiplier on every dollar that I invest is. This is super important, but man, we need a house. We need shelter. How do you balance these things within the financial order of operations? And this is why I think we're so unique among financial, pundits or advisors and other things, is because there's a dirty little secret of the financial world that, if you watched YouTube channels and you watch financial advisors talk, you'd think they're all out there saving up 20% and putting down 20%. And then, and it's a happy world that works that way with no PMI and everything else. The reality is, when I walk the halls here and I ask other financial advisors, and I even think about myself, I didn't put down 20% on my very first house. Mm-mm. I put down 5% on my very first house. And I think there's even deals where you can get 3% down on your first house.
3.5 on my first house.
So I think that's the dirty little secret. Now, look, you only get this exception on your very first house. Now, hopefully, once you're on the house ownership train, through that appreciation, your next house, when you upgrade, you're going to put down 20%. So that's the first thing, because I don't want you necessarily, and I'm very flexible on this, I don't want you shutting down all savings, because that employer match is just too powerful as a reason that it's step number 2 of your financial order of operations. But I understand that step 4, emergency reserves, is going to probably have some fold over or cross section there between that 3% to 5% that you're putting down on the first home to what's going on with your emergency reserves. use that grace, use that extra money that's allowed there to make that decision where hopefully you're still being able to do that nice compromise in between where you're still focusing on your army of dollar bills, but getting in that first house. Now, there is an asterisk on that. I know right now the housing market's ridiculous.
It's
and it
doing
seems like I
something
just
weird.
read a post just last night on Twitter where this guy was saying there was this young couple had saved up 20%, was looking to buy the house next to him. And it looked like the deal was about to be locked down because they had, I guess, met before this hit the market. And then this out-of-state older couple comes in, does a full cash offer at 20% above even the asking price.
See it over and over and over.
The young couple just got completely left holding the bag. I hate that.
Yep.
I mean, and this is why I get so mad for young people right now, is that there are some weird distortions between institutional investors, between migration patterns in the country right now, that young people are getting the short straw when it comes to getting that first house. But I'm just telling you, and this is easier said than the reality, but I think it is. I think it's going to settle down. There's already been, just this month, it was released that new housing starts actually had some trouble in the last month because I think some of this monetary high inflation is working its way through the system. Be patient. Don't lose your brain on due diligence and other things because this season will pass. And that's something I know when I was, and this is not a perfect example, but I can remember I went to a friend's parents' second home and I was like, how does this attorney afford this beautiful lake home? I'm just never going to be able to make enough money to do this. The time's getting away from me. Be patient, slow down. Don't lose your brain on this unique, because this too will pass, just like market downturns, pass. Good financial concepts are pretty timeless. And it's funny. And I guess to finish off the story, I could afford those lake homes now, but when I was, in my early 30s looking at it,
seemed like it was never possible.
Seemed like it was not possible, but I just didn't have the foresight to see what was to come. And I think it's the same thing I would tell young people, even Team Crash here on my content team, is that I think that there will be an opportunity in the coming years.
I think so too. I don't think that, we don't know what it'll look like or when it'll happen, but something will happen, right? Something will change to make opportunities available. It's just a matter of when and what. All right, Brian, this next question is from Crisco. It sounds like the oil, but it's actually like Chris and then CO, like company, like Chris Company. But it's pretty hilarious to say Crisco. Can you explain how employee stock purchase plans work and if it's worth maximizing? I can do up to 10% of my paycheck with a 15% discount each purchase period. I'm so glad that Chris asked this question because this is so often overlooked. This is so often something that gets missed in employee benefits packages, and it drives me nuts.
So look, I know you're so good at just pushing it over to me, but we've had a lot of this conversation. I know you deal with this probably even more with your clients than I deal with my clients. And I'm going to add a layer to this, a bolt-on, because you've done it to me.
Okay.
Give your initial thoughts, but then also talk about where does that fit in the financial order of operations as well, because you said it, 15% discount, and some of these plans are not written 15% just at the beginning of the course.
That's right.
It's between, there's this holding period here, and they'll give you the 15% discount, the cheapest during this window. It's incredible.
Yeah, so first thing I'll say is not all employee stock purchase plans are created equal. Some of them are different. They don't all operate the same way. But essentially what it is you work for an employer, and they say, hey, as a benefit to being an employee, to driving home the thing that we're trying to do, we're going to let you buy our stock, and we're going to give you a discount to be able to buy that. So if the stock's trading at $100, instead of you having to buy it for $100, we are going to let you buy it for $85. So immediately, like right off the bat, that screams something to me. That screams Free money. Free money. Free money. Wow, we both started whispering in the microphone at the same time. Free money,
That's
right?
not screaming. That's whispering,
That
by
is
the way.
literally free money that you can take advantage of. Your employer saying, hey, this thing that's worth 100, we'll let you get into it for 85. So I get really, really excited about employee stock purchase plans because it is, in essence, another mechanism for you to grab free money. Well, if you're following the financial order of operations, the place that free money should come in is on step number 2 when you have your employer match. Now, there are some other things you have to think about because, like I said, not all employee stock purchase plans are created equal. Some of them will have extended holding periods, which means those dollars may or may not be liquid. They may or may not be available to you readily. Some will make you hold them for a year. Some will make you hold them for 18 months. You need to go review your plan document to see, okay, if I buy this, could I actually redeem it for cash tomorrow? Or do I have to hold this stock for a certain period of time before I can liquidate it? If it's something where you can buy it today or buy it this quarter, buy it at the next offering period and immediately sell it for cash, in my mind, that sounds a lot like free money. And I think I got to put that into step 2. And I think I got to capitalize on that while it's available to me.
I can't remember if we agree or disagree on this because there are some things that you and I don't see eye to eye on. I like adding an extra step in there if you can afford it financially of holding. Not only do you have the employer holding period, but you also have, if you hold it for 12 months and qualify for long-term capital gains versus short-term capital gains. Remember, long-term capital gains, much lower tax rate than the ordinary income tax rates or your current marginal rate on anything held less than 12 months. I like if you can afford it, and I guess if you're in a mature enough place on the financial order of operations, doing it 12 months, holding it, then selling, but then I like creating a process where every year, because realize you're going to be adding, and does get to be a risk that if you have too much of your working wages with an employer and now all your financial assets over this employer. It reminds me of my days back when I was managing money for executives at Lucent, where all their wealth just went away because because the company got into a lot of financial straits. So that's why I like a laddered type strategy where you actually create a cleansing process where every year you're cycling through after you've reached that 12-month holding period. Did you agree with that or disagree? I couldn't remember.
I do sort of agree. I do like the 12-month holding period so long as exactly what you said, you don't become over-concentrated in your employer stock. And as a reminder, we consider over-concentration to be 5 to 10% of your total liquid portfolio. So if you're someone who every year you get options and every year you get RSUs and then you also have this ESPP, if you try to hold those ESPPs for a year and you have tons of options and tons of RSUs, you got to kind of play the game of how comfortable I am carrying that exposure for a full 12 months. A lot of it's going to depend on the size of your outside portfolio to determine whether or not that's a viable strategy for you or not. So I kind of agree with you and kind of disagree with you, but it's very specialized on the individual person. So I think employee stock purchase plans are a great benefit to take advantage of, but just like all things in your financial life, you want to make sure that it all works together. If you do have an ESPP and you do get awarded RSUs, and if you have been granted options, you want to make sure that you understand the tax consequences behind how you behave on each one of those. Some you get to control the taxation, some the taxation is completely out of your control. So you want to just make sure you have a strategy in place that if you're going to utilize those as part of your financial tool belt, you're thinking through it well, you're optimizing, you're being a financial mutant about how you approach those decisions. Now, this is, again, a great time. We're talking about, when does it make sense to think about hiring an advisor? One of those times is man, my financial life just gets so complicated and I don't understand how all the pieces work together anymore. And I want a second set of eyes to make sure that I'm not missing something. There's something I'm not thinking of. If you are someone in that stage and you do have these different options, you may want to consider taking the relationship to the next level because this is exactly the type of thing that a really good advisor at Abound Wealth can help you start thinking through and start figuring out.
This is what when I go on like Twitter, and somebody says, why would I ever hire a financial advisor? I'm just going to buy the total market index for the rest of my life.
Sure.
Screw those guys and their financial plan. I always chuckle to myself because it is back to that saying, you can keep your financial life as simple as possible. But if you're successful, that complication, it finds you. You can't, if you're playing hide and go seek, success will find you and create complication. So don't feel like you have to do it. And there will come a point where you'll graduate. That's why I always chuckle when I get those comments. I'm like, if you only knew what a true financial planner, not a salesperson, does for you, this is the nerdy stuff, the meaty stuff that we try to help clients with.
And I do think one other thing, make sure you understand how your plan works, because you already alluded to this. You said you get a 15% discount. Sometimes it's a 50% discount on a certain day. That day may be the first day of the quarter, last day of the quarter. Sometimes they'll actually let you take the lowest price, which then, if that's the case and you get to choose the lowest price over an offering period and you get the discount, that is just absolute money. You have to take advantage of that. I think they are great benefits. If you log into your 401, if you log into net benefits and you see that in there, it's something you ought to be thinking about for sure. All right, Brian, here's the next question. This one is from Jake. Jake said, do the guys recommend supplemental disability insurance above and beyond employer provided? Married, 40-year-old, working in software. So, Brian, I think first, what is disability insurance? Why do we need it? Are there different types of it? Is what my employer gives me good enough, or should I think about also having some on the outside?
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad you asked the question when you did, because I think this is like most things. I'm trying not to make an analogy when it's unnecessary, but it's
Does it have to do with cars?
No, having a background in tax planning. Everybody thinks tax codes are so complicated, and I always just say you have to understand the why. If you just go read the instructions to a form before you actually look at a form, you'll have a much better understanding of what the intent was for this. So when you look at disability insurance, what is the why on this is once again comes back to just like term life insurance is in case you die prematurely, what's the things that will replace the income for unfulfilled obligations you have. And that might be debts, that might be income for your surviving spouse, that might be education goals. Well, death is not the only thing that triggers that need. And there's actually a lot of research that shows you're much more likely to become disabled than you already even
prematurely die,
and might not be able to do your job. So it's another thing that can be insured. And remember, we don't sell insurance, so this is our take on this, is that I think you have to first ask yourself, how susceptible is my family and my desires and my goals financially if I'm no longer able to work? And for most of us, it's going to be you're going to be on fragile, shaky ground if you no longer can work just because you're disabled. So once you decide that the need is there, you need to figure out how much. And that's why, now, here's a few cool things. And because it's written into the tax policy. So maybe it's okay that I did my tax analogy. If you pay with after-tax premiums, meaning you pay with your after-tax, meaning you didn't get a tax deduction when you funded the premiums, the IRS does allow, because it was written into legislation, that the benefits for disability insurance is paid tax-free.
Yep.
So with that's a huge head start, because think about how many of us are paying over 30% of our income goes to pay taxes. If that now the net benefit comes to us tax-free, man, we can pay for a lot of life with that. So that first gives you a huge head start that you don't have to replace 100% of your income. Maybe you only need to replace 60% of your income. It depends on really go look at your tax situation, look at your living expenses. So once we figure out how much you need, and if it's 60% is a good rule of thumb, we can again go compare. What does my employer pay for? Take into account, because if it's employer paid, remember, you're not going to get the tax benefit. Maybe you have to reduce that down for net of taxes. But do that comparison so you can figure out what is the need and how much are the premiums. What is by the way, you also need to make sure you have enough cash reserves to make it through the the waiting period that you have to do on different premiums. All this stuff comes into play, but it's definitely a very important exercise when you're looking at the mitigating of risk in your overall financial life.
Another big benefit to having disability insurance outside of your employer is if you do change jobs, perhaps you had disability insurance with one employer and then you go to a new employer, they may not offer it, right? So one of the good things about having an outside policy is you do get to take it with you, you do get to carry it with you. I don't think you mentioned this. There's one other thing I want you to...
I left a little meat on there. I know where you're going.
Okay. You talked about, there's two different types, right? Why don't you go and talk about those two different types and why they matter.
Well, you have to pay attention to what you do for a living and how specialized it is, because there's ONOC, which means think about surgeons and stuff like that, is that if you work with your hands and all of a sudden, that part, you might find if you have just a general disability policy and your hands don't work like they should, but you could go work another job. We always use the example of be a greeter at Walmart. That policy might not pay the full benefit. So you need to pay attention to, so that's why there are, ONOC it allows you to specialize, meaning if you can no longer work in your occupation, that it will pay at this level, and it has different criteria for triggering it.
And usually a little bit more expensive.
It's going to be more expensive. And here's something I have done for my own person, because I have disability insurance too, is that it's okay if you have some ONOC that's more expensive, that covers some base level type of expenses so that you're not leaving the family penniless. And then maybe you could have some general disability insurance too, because that way maybe if you can work part-time or go do something, because work is good, it is supplements with the ONOC policy. Great. It works out. It doesn't have to be an either or. You can do a balanced approach, just like most things in life. It's not polar or binary. There's usually a lot of gray zone that you need to make sure you do the actual exercise, figuring out what the why is, what's the need, and what you qualify for, and work with all the benefits and kind of put together a plan.
I love it. Love it. All right, Brian, this next question is from Jesse S. Jesse said, I'm planning to go from a W-2 job to self-employed over the next few years. I don't know how deep my cash reserve should be for both personal and the business side. Any guidelines to help? Brian, you've used to be a W-2 employee, and then you switched over into the self-employed world. What did you do from a business planning standpoint, and how did you think about cash from a cash management standpoint?
Yeah, and look, there's several ways to think about this. Is that I need to first know there's several criteria, because we're in this new modern world where we have side hustles, and yes, you might be a W-2, but you're going to become more of an independent contractor, where even though you're going self-employed, maybe you're just restructuring to where you're going to have money coming in. And that's a different situation than somebody who's leaving to go start a brand new enterprise. And why do I make this differentiation? Is because if you're starting a brand new enterprise, just know, especially like my situation was, I was right at six figures. And then in my first year of starting a company, I made, I think, $15,000.
Stark contrast.
Stark contrast. So if I didn't have, and I can tell you from my own personal experience, I spent a few years not only creating the business plan, and realize when you create that business plan, you don't write what you think will happen or what you hope happens. You need to write 3 versions of your business plan. I'm talking about actually Excel spreadsheet where you're running projections with one, what you think is going to happen. You can also run, oh my gosh, I'm going to be rich, what you hope will happen, but you better run that third scenario that most people avoid running, which is, oh my God, I'm an idiot.
What if
this
fails?
Thing is going to be a disaster. So you better run that scenario of how bad it could be, because that's going to allow you to figure out how much time can you build through having cash reserves to hopefully give you enough time to dog paddle, to recover, to get to that healthy position. I was fortunate that I had saved up, my wife and I had saved up about 50 grand when I started my company of cash. And we were living such a modest lifestyle at that point when we started, that was enough to bridge going from 6 figures down to 15,000, that it was year 3 that I'd gotten back up to here. And I was still behind because I realized my retirement savings and all that stuff kind of went on the skids during that period. But it was enough time to have the cash to bridge that divide. Be realistic with yourself. Now, I did bring up the person who maybe it's a restructure or it's a side hustle or something where the money's coming in. It's now how do you structure it appropriately? For somebody like that, if you're trying to figure out the difference between being paid W-2 versus being self-employed as an independent contractor, take into account the self-employment taxes or the FICA and Medicare, because that's, there's going to be a 15.3% or 7.65 that now you're picking up not only the employer portion, but also the employer portion. Did I say that right?
Employee,
employee
and employer.
You pay employee and the employer. That's why it's 15.3 versus the 7.65%. And make sure health insurance and all the benefits and all that stuff that comes in. I feel like I'm shortchanging this side of the answer, but I think I've given you enough of the Scooby snacks so that you can hopefully follow the trail.
Here's another piece of advice I would give you as you think about going self-employed. And I see this problem all the time. When you're the boss and all the money is coming in and you have control of all of the money, it's really easy to get sloppy, right? Oh, I need some money. I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to go buy this and I'm going to use this card for this. It makes a lot more sense if you keep things clean from the beginning. Let business stuff be business stuff and let personal stuff be personal stuff. Because when it does come time to do your taxes, or when it does come time to actually assess, is your business doing well or is it doing poorly? If you've got it all intertwined and intermingled with your personal finances, man, it's going to be hard to really discern what you truly have going on. Anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I picked on you because you and your spouse, you ran Excel spreadsheets way too long. I do encourage people to get something like QuickBooks, get to a true accounting. But I want to close it out with one little piece of advice that I wish that my much wiser self, who's now had success, would have told the green version of myself that just didn't know what I didn't know. Do not, and this sounds so simple, but pay attention. Do not get busy doing nothing. Because what I was very guilty of when I first started my business was I had the cleanest set of financial books. It's the exact opposite. I think I bought QuickBooks right as I'm doing the I'm doing the operation documents. And that's, and going to the attorneys and that type of stuff. And I had the cleanest set of books. But what I should have been doing was trying to figure out where I was going to get business. And that's why I think that is a lot of us as business owners, we do what's comfortable. And for me, that was accounting. I knew accounting inside and out. So I was getting busy doing nothing. That was not incrementally adding any value to the growth of my company. And that's why I look back, it did take me 3 years to become a true entrepreneur versus an unemployed person that self-impose this restriction on yourself that's just not maximizing the opportunity. So get scared, use that fear to motivate you to go do the uncomfortable stuff. That there's a reason entrepreneurs make the money they do is because they do the crap that others aren't willing to do. And that's on yourself too. Go do the uncomfortable stuff so that you can be successful.
I love it. All right, Brian, this next question, this is from Jake. How do the guys feel about buying a home with the hawkish comments from the Fed on raising rates? I'm hoping it calms things down. I don't want you to speak so much to this exact question, Brian, but I am curious because a lot of people are thinking, how much should we allow outside forces to influence huge decisions that we're making? Meaning, okay, if we think that interest rates are going to rise, does that mean we should go out and immediately buy a house right now? Or, if we think that, the market's down a little bit, I don't need my emergency fund, I'm just going to throw money at the market because there's an opportunity. How do you, as a financial mutant, weigh the opportunities that outside forces present versus actually making prudent and wise decisions over the long term?
This is exactly why I love what we do for a living, is because you've got to paint with the broad whys first to get the components, the basic components of your financial plan checked in, and locked in, have a good foundation. And what I'm talking about, it depends on which stage of life you're in. But, if you're young, it's really the career choices. It's the degrees in college and that type of stuff, and avoiding the debt issues. When you're getting that messy middle, kind of like what Jake is probably talking about here, you get into your 30s, it's now making sure that you don't screw up the lifestyle type decisions like the cars, the houses, to where you're letting that stuff shape your decision. We just did the Warren Buffett, and it was like even in investing being shaped by, reading the tea leaves of what's going on in the world. That stuff's important. Don't get me wrong. But if you get the why, the basics of, and this is like, I even talked to some of our secondary advisors and some of the primaries as they're making these life decisions on houses and stuff. I said, you're going to be here for the next 10 years, aren't you? I mean, you're going to be in this area for the next 10 years. You've got this much income. Your trajectory is going up. Don't let the crazy what's going on with this housing market blow you from making decisions. take it and make sure the cash flow works. Because like I said, anytime you're dealing with anything with debt and that's mortgages, business investments, real estate investments, you better be able to pay that note and that payment no matter what's going on out there. And that's why cash reserves and keeping all that stuff in check. But once you and that's why we do the financial order of operations, because it naturally builds that stuff into the plan. But it is once you have that basic, you can start coloring it into, I'm going to be in this area. Yeah, I might be overpaying for this house, but 10 years from now, will that matter? It's the same. I can flip the coin and say, if you're in a high paying income situation, but 4 years from now you're moving, I don't care what you make. Don't go lock yourself in on something that might turn out to be, I was about to use, just say grenade. I was going to say a bag of poop, but but it could turn out bad for you. So you got to understand the why and build the basic components, and then you can let the tea leaves of being it's really don't time the market, build the plan, and then you can let the some of these micro things that are part of your big macro plan be colored a little bit by it. It's just like when we talk about dollar cost averaging into volatile markets, that's a micro action you're taking on a macro plan that you've hopefully already created that was good before the volatility hit, during, and then after. You can do this same mindset, this financial mutant mindset on every component of your life. Is you got to first understand the why on the housing before you start letting Fed rates and mortgage rates and all that stuff influence it. I don't know if I talked too abstract because this is such a personal decision, but I did want to put the mindset into the answer.
I want to make sure I heard you right, because this is like a housing thing, and this is for Team Crash. This is for everybody, right? I think that what you just said was it's better to overpay for a house that you can afford, right? Like, so right now, if it makes sense for you to buy a house and you've done all the things and you follow, it's better to overpay for a house you can afford right now than to overbuy a house you cannot afford.
Right.
Like, I don't have enough money and my income's not quite there, but man, I just want to get in before rates rise and all this stuff. You want to make sure that you don't get too far out on the risk spectrum, but it's okay if you're not getting the timing exactly perfectly right. Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, and truthfully, I'm a perfect case study. I didn't know that you could make money in real estate until I moved to the state of Tennessee. Because in Georgia, I bought a house in 2003 that I lived in and sold it in 2019. So do the math on that. It's owning it 16 years. And I lost $40,000. How do you do that?
That's not how you're supposed to do real estate investing.
I mean, I'll tell you how you do it. South Atlanta real estate, because we got crushed, and I've done shows on this before. But do I regret buying that house in 2003? Not a bit, because I got a lot of life out of it. I knew I was going to be in the area for that extended period of time. I mean, yes, 2003, I wouldn't have bought the house, but I was not hurt because it fit the messy middle that I was with having kids and everything else. And I had the order of operations right, that financially I was able to absorb it, move on. But it really ties into, you better get the big stuff right, so the micro stuff doesn't sidetrack you into making a mistake.
Here's another just little tidbit, specifically around Jake's question. He was like, hey, how did you feel about these comments coming from the Fed? The government, Fed, fill the blank, they don't always do exactly what they say they're going to do. So like they might say, oh, rates are going up, but then something might happen and rates might not go up. Or, oh, rates are going down, and then something might happen, then inflation happens. So also, think one in the hand is worth two in the bush when it comes to predicting exactly what the future is going to look like. I would make decisions based on what you have going on today and less on what you think that policy might be tomorrow, tax or otherwise.
I do have one closing comment, because a lot of people are going to troll probably. They're going to say, he owned a house for 16 years and lost $40,000. Recognize, here's the cool thing.
I don't think anybody's going to troll you for that.
No, but here's the thing I think is interesting. I still walked away from closing with a multiple six-figure check.
Sure, yeah.
Do you know why? Because I had paid down that mortgage to practically nothing. And, and so here's the thing is that, and if you divide $40,000 by 16 years of use, it now becomes much more digestible. Yeah. So I'm telling you, that's why if you can expand, like if you're making a housing decision 10 years in the future, that's more important than where we are on the pricing, especially for use assets. Now, investments, if you're thinking about doing your first rental property, you do primarily make your money on investment property on the purchase price.
Yep.
The cash flow helps on your rent, but a lot of the money's made on, are you overpaying or are you getting at a super discount? So, I mean, you definitely want to be more cautious on that investment side, but if it's a use asset and it's going to provide shelter for your family, I give you a little more grace.
Love it. All right, Brian, you want to get, here's one to get on your soapbox on, because I think you're going to. This is from Dylan. Oh, man, and I'm excited about this one. No, you're going to like this. This is going to get you juiced. Any words of encouragement to us younger folks with very little invested? It seems like social media and financial communities normalize people in their mid-20s having six-figure portfolios already. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anything you'd say to that, Brian? Anything you say to the thing, what social media and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and all these things are telling our young people about where they ought to be from a financial standpoint thus far?
Yeah, I realize it's all fake.
It's all fake. It's all lie.
Yeah,
it's not.
There's a few. Like I said, I listened to the Joe Rogan, Mr. Beast episode, and Jimmy is crushing it. I mean, he's making $1 gazillion a year. There are always going to be outliers like that. But let me give you some cold, hard facts. The typical millionaire reaches that age at 49 years of age. I think that is always amazing because once again, I try to dissect into the why and how is that possible. Most people graduate college or get started in their careers in their early 20s. If you take early 20s to 49 years of age, you can see that they're approximately getting close to 3 decades, 2.5 to 3 decades of their money working for them. That's the reality of the situation. And that's also the reality of compounding growth. It's not, I would tell you, don't focus on what you're seeing on social media. Focus on getting that first $100,000 invested, and then you're going to watch that turn into $500,000, and then you're going to see that turn into $1 million, and then after you get to $1 million, $3 million happens like that. I'm just telling you the compounding effect, because every time your money is making 8 to 10%, you're talking about hundreds of thousands. You're talking about $100,000 or more if you're over 7 figures. That's the reality of the situation. You don't see many 20-somethings. I did a show. If you want to go out there, there's an archive I did with PT Money where I described that my goal was, and I shared this, and I've shared this previously. It kind of makes me squeamish because I don't like to talk about my financial life, but it's I wanted to make $100,000 by the time I was 30. Because I started my company when I was 28, I didn't hit that until I was 31 because I was right underneath that at age 26, 27 when I was working for the other employer. And then I wanted to have $1 million liquid, meaning that in cash and in investments that I could get access to by the time I was 40. I didn't hit that either. And I think that is but now here's the thing, I'm getting close to 50 and
things have worked out.
Exponential growth factor. I don't even think if you'd asked 40-year-old Brian, do you think you'll have this by this? I would have said no way. And that's the way, because we always think linear, and then we get down on ourselves because we saw something on social media and we're like, man, I'm thinking linear. My assets are growing this slow amount. And then I'm seeing these other people. I'm comparing myself. And remember, comparison is the thief of your happiness. No. If you do what you're supposed to, that's why we give you the financial order of operations. We tell you how financial mutants think about it. You're not going to be thinking linear. You're going to be thinking living a life of exponential growth when you get to be in your 40s. And that's why I'm always very open. Messy middle, it's okay that you feel broke and you're having to be very deliberate with the savings and the discipline, because I'm telling you, I didn't feel like I had money until I was 42, 43 years of age. And I think that goes against what you see out there in social media. And because we even have people say, are you guys wealthy? How can you give us advice? And I don't like to brag about what we're doing, but I'm telling you, if you will do this and follow, we have created so much success. And I get the emails from you guys. I get the comments from you guys. I know we're changing people's lives, but you've got to be patient. You've got to do the hard work in the beginning. And I've even done content where I show after 10 years of investing, still the lion's share of your value of your account is still what you put into it. It's not really until you get into years 20, 25, and 30 and beyond that you see that the 70 to 90% of your account value is now the growth. You had to put the time in. That's why when I talk about the three components of wealth, discipline, money, and then time is definitely the most important component of that 3-ingredient recipe.
You know, we have a wealth management firm where we work with very, very successful and wealthy individuals and families all over the country, all different walks of life. You know, none of them are on social media boasting and bragging about how much money they have or how well they've done or how successful they've been. I often have to do this with my wife. You know, if we're driving around, she'll see like a really nice car or we drive past some really nice house. Oh man, that person must have so much money. I'm like, no. When you see all these really nice trappings, that's not a sign of someone who has a lot of money. It's a sign of someone who's willing to spend a lot of money. Whether they actually have it or not, you have no idea. There's no way to discern that based on the outward appearance. And in our experience, most folks who are wealthy and have done well aren't trying to put it out there on social media talking about it. So I'd be very weary of those folks in their 20s that are putting out how successful they are and how much they have figured out, because I just don't know if I buy it. I just don't know if I believe it. So if you want to do something that'll be very helpful to make you feel a little bit better about where you are, we have a formula that can help you, right? And this is based off of the money guy, the money guy next door. That'd be awesome. The millionaire next door formula. Take your age, multiply it times your income, and then divide it by the number of years until you get to 40 plus 10. Age times income divided by 10 plus the number of years until you get 40. That'll tell you where you should be from a net worth standpoint if you want to be an average accumulator of wealth. And there's nothing wrong early on being an average accumulator. Your goal should be to double that number, right? That's to know if you're a prodigious accumulator. If you can follow those two things, that's a much better metric of, okay, am I where I'm supposed to be, or am I close, or am I moving in the right direction? And even more so early on, your savings rate should be your driving factor. You shouldn't care about, do I have a 6-figure portfolio? Have I made $1 million by the time I'm there? Any of those sort of things. You should focus on, am I saving 25% of my gross wages? And am I doing that as early as possible? Because if the answer is yes, the hundreds of thousands and the millions of dollars will come. You have to get the behavior right early on. I would ignore social media, ignore those folks, ignore the people in their 20s that are normalizing that, because hear it from us, it is not normal.
Yeah, and I want you to know your why. I mean, know what makes you happy financially, because you know, I really do wish I could do like a Brewster's Millions experiment, because we've done so many shows on the dark side of wealth and other things where there's so many CEOs of companies that are just loaded but extremely depressed. So money is not this, and that's probably the biggest thing I work with clients on, is that they think when you reach this level of wealth, let's just say decamillionaire, you're going to find it, you don't feel any different. You know, when you sell your company for $1 gazillion or you have $10 million of investments, you feel no different. Now you can do a lot more, but you need to understand the why, so you get the incremental happiness and actually have a fulfilling life. Because I think that's why so many lottery winners and others, because they're purposeless. I'm saying that completely. I don't know why I'm having trouble saying purpose. But they don't have a purposeful life at the point that they don't ever reach the fulfillment side of happiness. So go, here's some homework for you. Go watch the 5 levels of wealth. We've done some incredible shows on that, and that's really going to walk you into this. Go watch the dark side of wealth that we've done, because that's gotten a lot of views, because we try to cover, because I want to give you a full picture of what the why is, so then you can focus on yourself and then really reach the best version of yourself financially as well as in life. Guys, thank you so much for letting us be a part of your financial journey. If you've not gone to the website, go check out moneyguide.com. If you want to see what we do in our day jobs, go check out aboundwealth.com. If you don't follow us on the socials, make sure you do that so you can stay plugged in with the Money Guy Show. Money Guy team, I'm Brian Preston, the host, Mr. Bo Hansen. I'll add it again. Money Guy team, out. A little rusty. Took a week of it.